Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming out to our censorship panel. I'm Nicholas Stark, president of the Political Science Club, and here we have Dr. Pierlott and Dr. Ruchti here. And if you guys like to give a brief introduction to yourselves.
Okay, this is Dr. Pierlott. He's my friend, my colleague. Your turn.
This is Dr. Ruchti. She's also my friend and my colleague. We're both in the philosophy department, and that's what we do.
Okay, all right. So I do my areas. I'll be a little more serious now. My areas are women's and gender studies and philosophy. More specifically for the philosophy department, I teach ethics for the philosophy department and philosophy and film. I have a background in aesthetics, which is essentially the study of philosophy of beauty and art. I have a PhD in interdisciplinary arts, and what that essentially means for me is that I studied theater and film from a philosophical background. And so what are the theories of creating performances using the mediums of theater and film? And one of my key areas of interest doing that was gender and how we perform gender and identity. During my time in my doctoral program, I was at Ohio University, which was, those of you who haven't heard about them in the news, it's one of the big party schools. And it was at the time a big party school. And I had to walk from my academic building down the main street to get to my apartment, which meant every day I would, and it would seem like basically from Wednesday through Sunday evening I would have to walk past all the drunk kids to get to my apartment, and I was subjected to everything from being called dyke, to being spit on, to being pushed, to being threatened, to having girls think I was a boy and hitting on me, to then having their boyfriends beat me up for hitting on their girlfriends. It was constant, the homophobic abuse. And at the end of my first term there, I had been given the assignment as a TA to give a lecture on performance art. And I decided to do a performance art piece for this section of 100, and I think it was 120 students, where I did a performance art piece where I demonstrated prejudice. And I did a very run-of-the-mill, aren't we so glad we're not racist anymore? Aren't we so glad we're not sexist anymore? And then at the very end, I did a litany of all of the homophobic, genderphobic comments that I had heard, knowing that I had seen many of those kids that were sitting in the classroom either saying or witnessing the things that had been said to me. And so basically, I called them all a bunch of homophobic, transphobic motherfuckers to their faces in a room full of 125 people. It was a very beautifully awkward moment for everybody. Except for me, I just reveled in it. And they certainly got the idea of what performance art was, and they very quickly stopped doing it. And within a few months, I didn't experience that kind of homophobia anymore, because all of a sudden it became very uncool to gay bash me walking down the streets. I still got a new apartment because it was still scary, but to me what was amazing was the power of art, right? And the power that art had to intimidate and scare and bully, because that is essentially what I did to those students. I intimidated, scared, and bullied them with that art. It was a very manipulative piece of art. And so I couldn't help but think after that about the power of art. And shortly after that, we had a guest lecturer come in and talk about censorship. He gave a very powerful argument for censorship in art and why censorship was a good thing in art. And so that's something I've thought about ever since, and maybe something to talk about. So, now you go ahead and tell them all about you and your experiences with gay bashing.
How can I follow that up?
Easy.
So I was my area of specialty is an agency. So what does it mean for us to be an actor? So not in the sense of theater, but in performance, although it's not unrelated, but in the sense of performing actions with intentions, what's required, what's the metaphysics of a human person so that they can be morally responsible. And a lot of times that connects to issues of freedom, both issues like free will issues, like the larger sort of, can we act in such a way that we're morally responsible given the way that the universe is, or whether there's a divine being, or all those sorts of problems that people have historically come up against because of their different belief systems. But also political freedom and social freedom. What does it mean to be socially free? How can I act in such a way? What kind of structures need to be in place politically and socially so that I'm able to be an agent that expresses myself and can form myself through my actions. So the metaphysics of agency, and then how that relates to ethics. My teaching, a lot of my teaching centers on ethical theory and applied ethics, applied ethical issues. I also do business ethics, which has a sort of sub-area of ethics. Sorry. I get that a lot. It's legitimate. And I also am very interested in theories of oppression, and that's something that our department, the philosophy department, has made a priority. In certain of our classes, in our ethics classes, we've made it a mature ethics class, we made it a priority to make sure that we touch upon theories of oppression and to address some of the issues that Simon just brought up. Like how is it that we understand ourselves, and where do we get our identity from? And then once you start to recognize how identities are constructed and formed, you can sort of see structures that are in place that might actually be very limiting, confining, but they're also in other ways liberating, because they are the structures that allow you to have an identity. So there's a kind of duality to that. On the one hand, I don't make my own identity up. In order for me to have an identity, I have to be in relation to others. On the other hand, the structures that allow me to start to relate to others often can be very confining and oppressive. So when we talk about censorship and freedom, the freedom of me to self-express, that's one of the reasons why I was interested in this panel. I'm going to not come from a legal perspective, but more from the morality of censorship. What are the values at stake in speech and self-expression?
Okay, well, it was decided by our panel that we'd like to make this from a panel discussion into an open discussion. So would you like to set the tone by making a statement, or do you want to immediately throw it open to a question from the audience?
I was thinking after that story, Mill is a philosopher who has argued about liberty, right? He's trying to defend liberty. And one of the things that Mill says about censorship is that when bad ideas or even offensive ideas emerge, that one way in which you can respond to that is by showing more speech, give more ideas, put them out there into the marketplace of ideas. And your story actually is a great representation of that. Here we have words that are meant to silence, meant to diminish, so the words themselves look like they might be the kinds of words that we might want to censor, right? When someone tries to silence someone, use a word that labels them in such a way that they can be dismissed, that they feel as if they might be threatened, there might be fear involved because the person looks like they're not just saying words that are expressing some political idea, they're actually saying words that are tantamount to fighting and attacking. Those might be the kinds of words we want to censor, but your experience sort of upholds what Mill would say, is that if you are clever and creative and have good words on your side, you can actually use art as a form to undo the power of those very same words. So I don't know if you wanted to, what your thoughts on that are, but that struck me.
Well, it's interesting is how angry it made some of the people in the audience, is because what I did was I rehearsed back the words they said to me. One of the things I did was I said, and I would look at the people who had said it to me. I said, but of course I'm just a dyke. I'm fat. I'm ugly. I'm a he/she. And I went through the litany of, I make you sick. You want to punch me. Oh, and you spit on me. Oh, and I went through all these things, and people were getting extremely angry. And really bothered them that I was using this language back at them. And so I wasn't using positive language. I was using negative language in a really positive way, which, of course, for those of you who weren't here a couple of years ago, we had a big controversy on campus that involved censorship, in which a group of spoken word duo had been invited to campus called Pussies, Pens, and Politics, and they were basically uninvited to campus because some administrators on campus felt that it was inappropriate for them to have the word pussies in their name. They were a feminist group, and they were using the name pussies as a way to sort of reclaim that derogatory language, but it had been deemed that it was inappropriate for them to reclaim that derogatory language. And so in effect, they were censored, kind of one of those, it's in your best interest to not say this about yourself kind of. So I'm trying to gently make the connection, knowing the connection's probably already been made for all of you. But I guess what you were suggesting is using more positive language in response to negative, whereas I'm actually taking negative language and using it rather aggressively and hostile.
Yeah, or we're just using more language. Like
Yeah.
that, instead of trying to regulate someone's speech through some coercive power, to simply use speech itself in response. That's the tool that's the only tool that at least in most cases, we might want to talk about exceptions where we think that censorship may be permissible, but there's a strong argument that in many cases where people are afraid about speech, that in fact speech has the power within itself to be able to overcome these things. What do you think about that?
Did you follow anything we just said to each other?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good.
So, like, think about some of those hateful words, because this is one of the big things, like hate speech. Hate speech is one of those categories where many people who are not for censorship all of a sudden balk and think, well, maybe this is a category of speech that we should censor. Especially on this is a big thing on campuses, right? Where you're trying to create an atmosphere where people don't feel like it's a hostile situation.
Well, although limiting hate speech could certainly promote and certainly would promote a more friendly and tolerant environment, where does censoring one type of speech start to cross the line? Because if all of a sudden you can't say one type of speech or idea, then you've set a precedent that if someone or a group is offended by something, then it's okay to limit everybody's freedom from saying whatever is now deemed offensive.
Yeah.
I think I agree with what he said, and then if you do censor hate speech in a way, you can't really regulate that. For example, I can't really say what I want to say, but for example, like the N-word.
Mm-hmm.
Black people say it to each other most of the time. So if it's considered a hate speech coming from a white person, if it's used in a negative way. So if we were to say, oh, we can't say that word anymore, then we're just shutting down a whole thing of people that say it as a term of endearment. And I think it would be the same way where I know some gay people, they say certain words to each other where it's not offensive or anything, but if you call them a word, then it is offensive.
In a different context, from a different someone from a different position.
Right. So you can't really censor that. You know what I mean?
Well, but let's take the N-word for example. When I've taught theater courses, and I've taught this play called it's set in a New York City subway, and it's written by Amiri Baraka. Please tell me somebody's read it. It's a really good play that uses the N-word a lot.
Smartphone.
Oh man. Wow. It's an amazing play. Amiri Baraka. It's
If only I had written on the board for people who want to look it up. There's actually you have
The Dutchman. Whew. Okay, so The Dutchman. If you haven't read it, it's fantastic. One-act play, phenomenal play. It's about a black man, 1960s. He's on a subway. He gets seduced by a white woman. Those of you aren't aware, even in New York City in the 1960s, a black man in public with a white woman get himself a lot of trouble if he is involved in any kind of public sexual act. She's trying to seduce him. Okay, and she starts using the N-word with him, and he starts using the N-word with her. Now, if I'm reading this play out loud to my students, and I start censoring it, and instead of saying nigger, I say N-word, what I've in essence done to Amiri Baraka's work is I have taken all of the power out of his work, and I have neutralized the play and made it safe, right? So if I say, I have her line as something, one of her more famous lines is something to the effect of, oh, and look at you, you're just an uptight little N-word in a white man's shirt. Wow, that'll learn you, right? And so now I, as a white person, in an attempt to not be offensive, have actually just censored this Black Panther, this Black Power, Black Panthers, aggressive, anti-racist, really anti-white work, right? But at the same time, if I get up there as this white person reading the play, have I not just appropriated his words? You know, it becomes very complicated. Okay. So we get the complication of that, but here's the other problem. Let's say you turn to a friend and you yell, hey nigga, what's up? Your friend's gonna look back at you and go, oh, hey. If I yell, hey nigga, what's up? They're gonna turn and look at me. It's gonna mean something different. One of the things that's gonna resonate when I say it is a history of lynching, okay? And so what you're saying isn't going to resonate with the history of, right, hundreds of years of violence, and especially over the last 50 years of lynching, and then, you know, modern day prison/slavery, whereas it does with somebody like me. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't know that it is that complicated. When a white person says the N-word, when it comes to the context of, say, a classroom setting, yeah, I think that is pretty complicated. But when it comes to just walking down the quad, I don't think it's all that complicated, because if the white person doesn't know enough about the history of that word, they probably shouldn't say it, because they don't realize that they just use a word that actually sounds like a death threat. Does that make sense? Which I think you probably knew damn good well.
Well, let me ask, go ahead.
Oh, no, you can go ahead.
I just want to ask, because there's another thing, you know, when we talk about free speech, so we can be talking about it in a legal sense, right, a constitutional sense, and there's a restriction of government power. But there's other ways in which we regulate each other's speech, right, which is really what we've been talking about, which has very little to do with the government. I mean, it could have to do with the government, but that's not really precisely what we're talking about. We're talking about how we socially punish ourselves and others for the kinds of speech that they might invoke at a particular situation, right? So, and this is a great example. Like, there's the one thing, there could be legal. There could, some law could come out and we say, okay, this is going to be how we're going to respond to this situation. But even apart from that, socially, we know that these different instances that you point out, we're all going to look at it differently. We're going to understand it differently. We're going to respond differently. So my question to you is sort of, do you think that that encroachment of our speech is a legitimate thing that happens, or is it as illegitimate as the government sort of trying to interfere? Are they the same? If I admonish you, because you just used the N-word, so I admonish.
And it's on video.
And it's on video. And I think it goes up on YouTube. I wonder, are we going to censor it? But if I were on it, is that the same thing as in this sort of context? Me saying, you really shouldn't have done that. Would that be the same thing?
Well, I think there's a difference between the social, repercussions of using such speech and like a political constraint on doing so, because the social constraint is you can't say that word because if you do, you will likely appear to be a racist, which is not socially acceptable anymore. However, if it were to become something that the government says, you actually can't say this, that is quite another fish to fry, I suppose.
Doesn't that become more socially acceptable then?
Well,
You mean if it now becomes something that shows that I don't have to respect the government? Or it gives it power, it gives it kind of power. It makes it more enticing. Yeah. Okay, the reason I bring it up is because we talk about campuses. Now this is a state school, so it gets really murky. But if this is a private institution, do you think that institution has the right to say that hate speech is not tolerated among its students, and that if a student is caught engaging in that kind of speech, writing something on a wall or something along that student can be expelled?
Well, I guess a private institution has the right to say that, you can't say these words, or you can't make it a public thing to demonstrate hate, but it doesn't really matter if you're saying it, because even if a person is thinking something and is prohibited from saying or expressing that something, they're going to act negatively towards whatever it is they don't like anyway. So I think censorship, in a way, is just like, oh, let's just push this problem away until it becomes so big it explodes.
Yeah.
Like,
There's something ineffective about it.
Exactly.
It's not getting at the root of what the problem is.
It's one of the things that whenever I begin a course, I always explain to my students that they need to get really comfortable hearing things they don't want to hear. And I make a habit of saying a lot of things my students don't want to hear. I'm not looking over here because they've already heard me say this. That the only reason we're supposed to have, what's that phrase called that I never actually practiced in my classes, where you're supposed to say nice things?
You can't say something
You don't
nice,
know.
don't say nothing at all.
No, it's like the
That's
political
fine.
correctness, which is that.
I was there with you.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
I don't do that either. But the whole political correctness thing, the idea behind it is not supposed to be so much to censor your speech, but to have an awareness of what you're saying. Is not to limit what you say, but to think about what you're saying. And so I encourage my students to kind of let that go and just start to develop an awareness. And remind them that they're going to say offensive things, they're going to be offended, and before they get too mad, they remember that they're going to offend somebody. Because if they don't get used to saying, if you don't get used to saying things that offend people, then all you're ever going to do is bury your offensive thoughts, your offensive ideas, and we're all just going to be a bunch of offensive asses that are going to just go around never changing anything we think or feel, and we're going to pretend like it's everybody else that has the problem, not us. On the other hand, I also say I draw the line at people who say offensive things just to piss people off, make people uncomfortable, or hurt people, right? So I wonder, is there a difference between speech that is a genuine opinion and speech that is intended to hurt somebody? And then there's the next question is, can speech actually hurt somebody? The old sticks and stones.
What I think is kind of interesting about freedom of speech, that's kind of what you're saying, is that this notion of freedom of speech means that there's no consequences to speech. And I think with not excluding state sanction or state censorship, but you have the legal right to call my mom a whore. That doesn't mean I'm not going to punch you in the face. You're going to get a reaction from that. And so that's kind of the myth of freedom of speech, is that freedom of speech means no consequences to speech. and I think that needs to be in question.
But if you punch me in the face, I can get you charged with assault. Should I have been charged with assault for saying offensive things about your mother?
Yeah, but you're assuming he cares if he gets charged with assault.
Oh no, you're right. You can decide that it's worth it. But notice, legally, I have the power. I have a power to place a burden on you for standing up against my offensive comment. Should you have the power to say Pierlott shouldn't be allowed to say those sorts of things? If it looks like in that situation where I'm saying it purposefully to punch, it's my verbal punch in your face. This is kind of a personal equivalent to the inciting a riot, right? Where you're inciting people. There's now going to be a lot of damage, and you should be held legally responsible for that. Should I be held legally responsible? Because a lot of hate speech, it often seems as if, even if it's not face to face, it seems as if there's some distant person that you're really just wanting to punch. And so I'm punching them by scrawling something on a wall or posting something on Facebook or something like that, and I'm hoping that it gets out there. Should I be held accountable?
You touched on political correctness. I do a lot of work in broadcasting, like podcasts and radio and whatnot. And I'm wondering where you see how that fits into like mainstream media and some of the things that have been discussed more frequently. The teen in Florida with the watchman who shot him and no consequences. How that?
Oh, okay, yeah.
I think we need to say watchman.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wait, so I lost the. Once you brought up that situation, I lost the.
Well, a lot of people have been saying that this is only getting so much play because it's an African American, and how it's just a whole bunch of different things. How there's been like almost opposite attacks. And it has been mentioned by the media, and how the whole race card and everything plays into political correctness.
So that in social media, a lot of people are able to voice, there are a lot.
One of the critiques, people have been saying that social media is currently driving what's on the news, and because social media picked up on the fact that he was a young African-American man, and they're saying that social media has been arguing that this was a racist attack, which it was, and that all of a sudden that what is counting as news is being dictated by social media. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, and how political correctness affects it, and where do you see how it should fit into that?
Because I heard you say something about this. Because I'm not on. I don't know what people are saying in the.
Facebook is this
I
application.
understand.
Well, it's not so much social media; it's just the news coverage in general, such like CNN, Huffington Post, any website like that, and how in certain attacks, race isn't mentioned and everything, and because of political correctness, and just seeing wondering where you think political correctness should fit into that.
I don't even know how to answer that. I think so. In that particular case, I think people are concerned because the shooter, I think as of today, nothing's happened, right?
I believe so. Yeah.
Right. So the concern would be that if in another situation, if the races of these two individuals were different, you'd have very different outcomes. So it's the hypocrisy of that. And so I don't like the political correctness. I heard you say something like that. Some people are suggesting that the only reason we're talking about this is because, and we shouldn't be talking. Like I got an inference like maybe we shouldn't.
Well, no, I personally don't think that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that a lot of people are speculating that that's the only reason this is, almost, say international news at this point.
And it's not. Maybe like it's not really an issue. It's not a really important issue, but because of political correctness has been blowing up. Is that like the sort of sentiment?
Sort of, yeah. That the fact that of the two races of the people involved, that makes it a bigger deal than it's been made out.
Yeah.
Actually, if I may just add a point of correction in there was slight progress later this evening. I don't remember which branch is doing it, but there has been a start of an investigation of the police department, but not of, but obviously no arrest as of. There's been just slight.
What he was hitting on, it's like the whole Coney thing now. Like when I was in high school, I was part of Invisible Children because they were a group in my high school. and that was how many years ago now. And now that just because it's been pushed through social media and YouTube, now it's like everybody is following it, and it's pushed all over the news just for that fact. When a couple years ago, hardly anybody knew about it except for when it came around to schools or when it had the huge events in Philadelphia and major cities.
Right, but they also discovered oil in that country recently, so that,
True.
you know.
I was going back to what you were saying about the shooting incident. It's like the hypocrisy of it that it wasn't a black or a white on black crime or a black on white crime. So now it's just because it was a Latino against an African American. Like now it's kind of like meddling in that area. Like political correctness in that sense. Like people aren't bringing up the race issue because like it's not that black and white issue. It's now a different colored. And now people can, like, do we really want to say that? Because it's only a big deal if it's a black and white issue.
Right.
And I think when it gets murky like that, when people start censoring out, when people are afraid to say black, when you find when people are like, oh, my friend, you know, he's a, and then you've got a problem there, right? When somebody stutters over the word. That's why I always discourage people from saying the word homosexual. I always say, just say gay. Because even if you aren't homophobic, the word homosexual makes you sound homophobic because it's so hard to say. It makes it sound like you're stuttering it out. You'd be like, oh, my friend, he's a homosexual. It sounds like, my friend, he's black, you know? And so I think when people start censoring out things like race, when you don't mention race, it's either because they're white, and we always assume the person's white, or because in this country, unfortunately, they're hiding something. The fact of the matter is we know that if that kid were white, that guy would have been brought up on charges. He was not an official watchman. He had no reason to be out there. He was told not to pursue that kid. He had Skittles. And yeah, you can choke on Skittles, but they were not a threat to anybody but himself. So those were integrated colored Skittles. I mean, it wasn't South though. So. Yes, I should be censored. You had to pick it up a while ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a little off topic now, but when you said something about like, can words really hurt someone? I just kind of thought, like, I guess, well, in the story you brought up earlier, like, all of those words that people had said to you, like, they didn't hurt you, but they completely, like, directed where you wanted to go with your career. And, like, it's, like, almost like that all inspired you, and, like, what you did with, like, the video, and then that made you want to do something else. It all stemmed from, like, these people who were, like, saying these things to you. And, I mean, yeah, it, like, hurt you, and then you, like, because of that, went in that direction, so.
One could also, yeah, definitely did benefit my career in some way. I also got beat up a few times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess that's beyond, like, whether words can hurt you, but that's just, like, hate.
The reason I asked the question about can the words hurt is I'm always going back and forth on this question of pacifism as a viable means of protest and change. And students in my classes know I'm constantly asking this question. And I think to myself always, if there's no need for censorship, right? If there's no point in censoring, then it's because things like art or words have no power to hurt. And if art and words have no power to hurt, then they must have no power to change. Follow my logic? And if art and words have no power to change, then I guess I need my fists, and I guess I need a gun to change the world. And I so much want to believe in a world where I can change it by teaching, by art, by protest, without breaking windows, without shooting somebody, without declaring war. I want to believe that I can bring down Bank of America and all my student loans, without killing a CEO, well, maybe one or two.
That's on YouTube,
I'm so kidding. I'm a pacifist. But if words and art aren't powerful, then how can they do that? And if you don't want to censor them, if they aren't dangerous enough to censor, then how can they be powerful enough to do that?
Well, I think words are absolutely every bit as painful as violence or bullets or whatever you want to compare them to, because as we said earlier, if you just shout out the N-word, someone like that could be construed as a death threat. So I mean, if a simple word aimed at someone who's different than you can, cause them to fear for their life, is that not every bit as dangerous and potent exactly as pointing a gun at them or brandishing any type of weapon in their direction?
But if that's the case too, that feeling results from the fact that there is a history of violence associated with the past and the fear of violence in the future. So it actually does have a physical representation outside of the ambiguous words themselves in use.
Yeah, but so why don't we move away from violence for a second? Because I think the point remains. So you can. What's the value of free speech? Why do we even care about it to begin with? Like, what's the value of it? Why is it important?
Because we're all free thinkers, so you should be able to say whatever you want, whatever you're thinking.
And what's your name?
Erica.
So Erica just pointed out one side of it, right? One side of it is I get to express myself. Why would I express myself?
We live in a democracy.
So a part of it might be so that I can be participatory in the way we govern ourselves, the way we live ourselves. But why? Forget about even just that. I mean, that's important. I'm not trying to say forget about it. But why else would I just, in here, right now, why would I speak? Why do I want to speak?
To convince other people of your point.
I want to influence other people. So when you said potency before, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be necessarily violent potency, because that's obviously some kind of, but it's just anything. I want to persuade. I would love everyone in this room to become a philosophy major. That's totally true. I really, really would. And if I could, for a very long time, I would try to spend all my energies trying to convince you to be a philosophy major. I might not be very successful, but I would try. Because my speech is something I do to affect the world. That's one side of it. Is that the other side of it is also that I'm a free thinker. How can, as a recipient of speech, as someone who can hear, I also want there to be freedom of speech so I can hear people's honest views of things, not views that are somehow been through either concerns of political correctness or from worries about coercion or this or that or the other. They're going to just kind of mold it up here and just give me spit out some packaged information. I want to hear what they really think, and I want to hear lots of different views about it so I can think about it. So both as a speaker and a hearer, I'm interested in free speech. And it's because those words have power. I think you said it, that was beautiful, by the way. I'm glad this is going to be on YouTube.
Watch out, CEOs.
As a speaker, if I want to influence the world, all of a sudden, do you think we all agree on everything? Absolutely not, right? We know we don't all agree on it. That need of mine to have effective speech is precisely why there's always going to be a temptation for censorship. Because as soon as you say something that just drills right down to a core belief, something I despise or detest, I am going to want to silence you because it's who I am. Now, I might say, well, I should resist that. And I might resist it for political reasons. But to say that I think that I really think that neo-Nazis should be able to have grandstands someplace, I don't really think that. I don't really believe that. But I think they should have a political right, perhaps. But I also wish they would shut up. You know what I mean? And I'm always going to have that tension because I just really don't agree with that. And that's a kind of human thing. It's part of our natural sort of setup.
One of you had your hand up. I don't know. I just saw a hand right there.
Did you have it? I don't remember what I was going to say.
I was just going to say, I was thinking about it in the sense of, being bullied. like when you're little, I just wrote a paper on relational aggression and like how people, like they're so powerful. Like a bruise will last for like a little bit, but like a fight happens and it's over. But like relational aggression, where like you're saying mean things to each other, like nothing gets resolved. So like you just keep doing it and it just keeps getting stronger. And like I don't get how you can't hold the person who's saying those mean things accountable to you. Like if a kid like commits suicide because they've been bullied by like people calling them like mean names, and you don't hold them accountable, like someone is accountable for them feeling that way. I think they're like very strong words, and I just feel like in that sense, like you have to hold the bullies accountable for what they're saying, and there has to be some sort of like punishment. Yeah.
In relation to that, my mother was my bully all of my life, and there was never a day when there was not a hurtful word or anything said to me, to the point where I pretty much silenced myself, and I removed myself from even talking to her, even just when I was a kid. And now it's at the point where I don't know where she lives, I don't know her phone number, and I think that's the biggest comeback. Like, I don't have to say anything to you. You know what you did. You can live with that. I moved on from it. So that's how I feel about that. But
so there are some people that can actually channel all that hate into something more productive to remove themselves from the equation, from the bullies, or anything of that sort. Some people can't find a way to channel all that angst, and so they turn to suicide or hurting themselves. Whereas if maybe they were more educated or in a better environment or something or other, they could find a better way to. Okay, so people call me a fat ass. Maybe I should get on a treadmill. Whereas I'm hurting myself with all the words repeating in my head, I could just go to the gym and something like that.
Kind of to follow up on the string of thoughts here, I'm a cyber school teacher, and most of the kids that I teach, a lot of them have come to a cyber school setting because they've been bullied in their other schools, and there's not as many ways to deal with it in certain situations because of maybe legal issues, and this is an option for the kids to still get an education in a safer home environment. It's hard to deal with because of this bullying. A lot of kids have social anxiety issues. Many of them have been abused in their own homes, so they've had to move from not only their schools but their homes to be cyber schooled. Many kids that are gay have been bullied, and this is a safe haven for them to just not have to go. I mean, I think one girl, got pushed down the stairs at school because of it. And it's really upsetting right now to be a teacher in that environment, and there's only so much you can do, especially in a cyber school setting. And I kind of wanted to bring up the censorship factor in the cyberbullying world and how that's kind of affecting, like, we don't even know half the time when these kids are being bullied because it's all through cyberspace unless they leave evidence, like the idiots they are, on Facebook. And it's really sad and heartbreaking to see as a teacher, to see them kind of struggling through this whole concept. And then we talk about hate speech, and they do have the right to say these things, but do they? I mean, you hear about these teen suicides all the time. It's affecting people because these kids don't have the coping skills yet. They aren't adults. They don't know how to get through that, and we need to educate our society and our parents and our communities about it before we're preaching all this hate to our kids. And unfortunately, my brand.
Not to diminish the importance of the power of speech. I mean, it is really important, but like, if I got punched in the face, I'd be pretty sore about that. I mean, that's not fun to happen. But like, not only that, but a lot of bullying isn't just verbal. I mean, of course, I'm going to be pretty sore if someone says mean things to me as well. But there's a lot of physical things. In fact, being pushed up the stairs is very physical. And at the end of the day, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I don't see how a law can stop someone from saying. I mean, there's a lot of Nordic countries out there. I really wish, in fact, I think it's Norway that I'm thinking, actually, but that has some censorship laws right now. A big issue going on with that. I'm not too sure if anyone's more familiar with this than I am. There's a lot of question about moral hazard, that there's a lot of censorship laws that have been created that are just meant to, like you were saying, silence someone more because you didn't want to hear them, not because it actually created some kind of a physical threat.
Right. Yeah, and so maybe there was, so part of what I'm hearing is,
it's like 3 parts there. Sorry.
there's a lot of speech that we might call hate speech, either against a group or a social category or against an individual person. There's a lot of speech that is self-silencing and damaging, psychologically damaging, right? And that kind of speech doesn't seem to fit the kind of speech that we just all said is a wonderful thing that we see a value in, that's supposed to be protected by free speech. It's not even an appropriate kind of speech. And so being aware of that kind of speech and figuring out how to respond to that speech is important. But maybe the answer is not some sort of law, right? It might not work. It might have consequences that we don't like. Certainly, from the sort of American stance has been to resist such things, right? We don't want to go down that route, generally speaking. Although there's been plenty of cases of censorship in America, but there's something within us, the American spirit, that we tend to look at that askance. But those are separate issues, though, right? So the one issue is like noticing what that speech is, and noticing that it should not be protected in a moral sense, and then what do you do in response to it? Those are two sort of different things that we can talk about. Should there be some response, or is it really like, well, since we're not going to make a law, I guess you just let everything go? So let me reframe because I think I'm trying to get at something here. I was asking this panel the other day. I was in a drugstore and magazine rack, and I have my son with me, young boy, and I noticed on the magazine rack, top shelf, Playboy magazine. You can see Playboy. But you can't see anything. You can see like the top of the head. You can't see anything else on the cover because the covers has something to cover over it. Is that censorship?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Was it intentionally placed there?
Oh, it's part of the packaging. It's got it in.
By law.
Is that censorship?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is it bad censorship? Is it?
In regards to that, I always thought censorship was used to make people feel comfortable. So when talking about like the Playboy magazine in an open area where little kids can walk in and stuff, it's gonna cover up the parts that little kids shouldn't be seeing. So that's censorship. Some people could say it's good. Some people
Okay,
could
so
say it's
let me
good.
throw this out there. I'm 12 years old. I'm in New York City. Just gone out there from Idaho with my family for my brother Ross's graduation from West Point. He has taken us to Central Park. We're walking along, my Mormon family, all of us, la-di-da-di-da. I see 2 women with mullets holding hands. Huh, I was told I was the only one like that in the world. Huh, I must have been looking too long because my mother very quickly runs up, throws her hands over my eyes, pulls me away, screams, "Don't look." Same kind of censorship.
It's still a censorship to make you feel comfortable.
But I was very comfortable. I was quite happy to see that I was not the only one out there.
Not you, I mean your mom. She's covering your face up to shield you from seeing 2 people of the same sex holding hands. It'll make her feel better if you don't see that. So, I mean, to me that's not right. It's not. I don't like censorship.
You're like, let me be clear about this.
Yeah, I don't like censorship at all. I definitely think it's used to make people feel more comfortable.
Gotcha.
So the fact that she's covering your eyes, or the fact that the Playboy magazine was covered up, that's not right to me. Because that should be in a place where the magazine should be in a place where it says 18 or older. It's in like
Is that censorship?
Not really. Because by law you have to cover it up. So
But isn't
keep
that
it open.
censorship?
Keep it open in a place where it can say, okay, it's warning you before you come in, nudity, you'll see nudity. I mean, it's just warning you. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I tend to think that's not censorship.
Really?
No.
Censor that tongue, buddy. I need to see that.
Well, yeah, here's the reason why, right? It certainly is paternalistic. So it's censoring information from children. But I am free to go buy that magazine.
Your son isn't. Can't even
No,
reach
my
it.
son is not, and that's true. So there is something paternalistic about this that we can also have a discussion about. But set aside the paternalism towards the young person, because I agree that there's a kind of censorship there that's paternalistic, and we can have a discussion about that. But all that's doing is saying, it's not just protecting young children, it's also protecting someone who walks into there who doesn't want to see it, right? If I don't want to see that sort of thing, don't I have the right to walk into that store and not be subjected to it just because it's there?
You don't have to go to that store.
And it's that person's store.
Friday!
Well, you just said, I don't have to go to that store. Isn't that then saying, well, now Pierlott, in order to go to that store, has to have the burden of having that thing exposed to him? What's the difference between that as a burden placed on me versus me saying, well, just cover it up so that I don't have to see it, but you can still buy it. The burden is, you can't look at it until you buy it.
You should also put the toilet seat down after you're done.
Exactly. It's another situation where there's a burdens. You're burdening one over the other, and it's just a redistribution of burdens around freedom. I don't really consider that censorship, only because it seems that, at least for adults, most of us can still obtain those materials if we want to. The child, I agree with you. I agree with you about the child issue, and I agree with you about how people can abuse the fact that. I agree with that all that. But nonetheless, it's kind of a trivial version of censorship. Even if you put it in, you got to be 18 years or older. That to me is another version of the same thing. It's just saying, hey, there's going to be certain places where we allow this, but we're not going to just allow it everywhere because there's a kind of regulation around this that is not actually making it impossible for someone to express themselves or to find a form of expression. That's very different from banning it, right? I mean, there's a huge difference between those.
I think you're splitting hairs, but.
I kind of think it is censorship, and we had a panel, actually a discussion in this club earlier with Jill. Do you know her last name? I can't. She owns the adult shop up in Westchester. It's a big controversy that she even has it here. I mean, because our kids are walking by a sex shop and all this stuff like that. It's kind of the same thing, like just because it says like it's a adult shop, doesn't that kind of bother a kid who walks by? They're saying because it's in a path of kids walking by from school or something. It's a magazine in a like 7-Eleven or whatever. I mean, to me it kind of doesn't matter. And I believe what she said was it's kind of more ingrained in our culture to be offended by those things, being our religious kind of upbringing, almost puritanical. And I had to agree, it's kind of like censorship. You're afraid to see, I'm not saying like there should be posters with like boobies and stuff and dildos all over the place, but like all over the place, but something so trivial, and like you said, your kid can't even like see it, it's so high up on the shelf. I think it is a form of censorship, and I would have no problem. I mean,
wait a minute, why can't we have those things, guys? Let's get to the heart of this. Why can't we have those things? Because Matt, by definition, that is censorship. I mean, if you went to speak and every time you went to say something, I cut you off, that'd be censorship. All these hands up in the air, me talking over the top of you guys, that's censorship. You're about to say something, I'm going to keep talking, that's censorship. Your hands up in the air.
If every time you put your hand up and I never get to speak, that's censorship. But I had to wait a couple seconds. Didn't I wait a couple seconds? That wasn't censorship. I just had to wait. I had to wait in time to be able to speak. I have to wait in space to be able to walk into that room that says 18 over. It wasn't right there in front of me. We always have these burdens placed on us. It's about where we draw the line. You said no dildos and boobies posters on the wall. Why not? Is that so? Your line is just a little bit further than where my line is.
It's still censorship.
You're
limiting access and availability. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying it's still censorship.
Fine.
Well, I kind of think like by you like making him wait to talk, like you could just say something else that could completely change what he was about to say, and it censored whatever was about to come out of his mouth.
Right, and I don't think that's really what we mean when we say censorship. Right?
One of the differences, or can I get a comment on censorship in marketing and rather censorship for individuals? Like, we censor tobacco ads on TV. This is a public good. We don't trust our public to know this advertisement is wrong, not to trust it. So, different dimension to the debate.
Yeah, I mean, it's not covered up in the shops though, like the other adult material is.
It doesn't matter if people know that's bad for you, you're still gonna buy it.
You can buy it, but you can't watch it on TV.
Okay, basically you're talking about child censorship, and even if we're saying that it is good for us to censor pornography from a child, how are we to determine what is good for censorship of a child who's to say her mother wasn't right for covering up her eyes because she wasn't old enough to determine for herself, that sort of thing?
Right. In a way, I almost want to walk away. I brought up my son was there because that was true, but I don't. I wasn't even really going for the child thing. I could be walking in with a friend of mine who's just sensitive and offended around such things, and I wouldn't want to be there. You know, so it's not. I could be offended by walking in there and saying, I don't want to see that stuff. So the question is, there's an offense that I have. There's an offense that I take, and so what requires, what kind of burden does that place on other people? Looks as if sometimes we want to say, well, just because you're offended, that's your problem, right? That's not really always true, is it? Aren't there certain kinds of offenses that we say, that offense is too much? We just heard a litany of people where we heard offensive things that, wow, that really seems wrong. You know, especially when we brought up, again, children again, and we get protective around children. But, you know, the children being bullied. And so I guess my question is, all right, if all I'm asking is just put that on the back of the shelf so I don't have to see it when I walk in, is that such a restriction on other people's freedoms that they should cry censorship and that, I don't know.
Well, I was going to say, I was looking at your tattoos because that's another big censorship. Like, there's nowhere I don't think there's a law that says you can't work at a place because you have tattoos or anything like that.
Just the U.S. military.
Yeah, I think that's the only place. And even with hair color, I had my hair this bright red color a couple months ago, and even it would offend people. Like even here, when we went to what's that? I can't remember the one dining hall we were at. These two girls were totally hating on me, one standing right next to me, and saying just like, you know, it offended them and everything like that. I told them, thank you for saying it to my face, but that's your problem, not mine.
You can be fired for having tattoos. You're not protected for tattoos, but.
Yeah, and this goes back to the question about advertising and the legal issues. I think advertising is not protected under the First Amendment.
In part because it's considered somewhere along the lines of what we would call it's a type of rhetoric as opposed to
actual original thought.
Yeah, it's
commercial speech. It's not political speech. It's not anything like that.
It's meant purely to persuade people as opposed to be truthful or artistic or original. So.
Well, speaking of art, there's something that occurred to me like, way back in the beginning. In the National Gallery in Washington, D.C., there's an entire room basically that's like 20 versions of the Madonna and Child. And I was there for my 16th birthday, and one of the things that occurred to me is that like there's a Gutenberg Bible in the Library of Congress right on display. That was like the #1 thing that I wanted to see. There's not a Quran. There's not a Torah. Like these are things that are government funds that aren't necessarily censorship, but they're like people that get to dictate what is art, what is important enough for us to preserve and show it to other generations. Like those things aren't what we would call censorship. They're not covering something up or bleeping out a word on TV, but they are shaping our culture.
Censorship and omission.
Yes.
Okay, and that was a direction I was hoping we would go in. And that's why I was doing the thing where I was silencing him, is the ways in which we silence people are actually forms of censorship. Who we allow to speak and who we don't allow to speak. Those are forms of oppression, and that I've been talking a lot with folks today, not surprisingly, about the Occupy Wall Street movement. One of the things that has been so effective about Occupy Wall Street is that they have gotten people to listen to people whose voices have rarely, if ever, been heard. And that really, if that was their only agenda, that is an amazing feat, right? Because they have thought they revealed how aggressive the censorship was that was trying to silence those voices. I mean, there was a media blackout on the Occupy Wall Street movement, an absolute blackout on the media where NPR was the only one talking about Zuccotti Park. None of my students last semester knew what was going on. And yet they had taken over more square footage. I mean, you had to kill people in order to get that kind of square footage in New York, and these people had done it. And somehow they had managed to get everybody in the world talking about them, and that's pretty amazing.
I'll kind of go reverse back to the foreign talk, because I think this is actually really cool to bring up the omission, because like taking Simon's example of the shielding of gayness of a gay couple is, you know, omitting that part of sexuality, right? And then even with having dildos and boobies on the wall, is still omitting that type of sexuality, and now we're limiting only types of sexuality that we're allowed to see in public are, you know, heterosexual relationships, you know, missionary position only if you're allowed to see it at all. You know, we have omitted only one type of sexuality.
In women's bodies, we can only see for consumptive sexuality or reproduction. And now it's really just for reproduction. And ultrasounds. Hey, you do.
Let me try to compliment them, because I like to compliment things, as you do too. In case you do. I agree, right? The omitting thing. I see that example, and I also have that same sort of moral response. Like there's something inappropriate. But what's inappropriate there is one person who has a kind of control over another person because of their relationship, and because of their age, and their vulnerability, and because of the way the laws are written about who actually has the sort of rights and responsibilities. One person deciding what the information another person is going to be able to get. But by and large, that's going to happen with parenting, right? That's going to happen anyway. So the question about when you say, well, only one sort of sexuality is being presented. If we're going to be talking about another case where you say in mainstream media how if they never present other forms of sexuality, then you can say that's a kind of corporate media censorship, because it is. It's omitting these possibilities. And nowadays we've seen, at least there are some examples, there's been a lot of progress in the past decades of being able to present more diversity, even though the mainstream media is slow and is still very conservative about those things. That to me is the issue that we should be concerned about, and not necessarily the parent. Because even though the parent is doing a damage, it's a particular person, and that's a problem. But if it's out there, if you can grow up and walk through a park and see two people